Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. All right, let's start today with a COVID update. We haven't done this for a while, and increasingly the numbers in the United States are looking better and better as vaccination takes place. We've seen the slowdown due to vaccine hesitancy. We will talk about it. We have also now seen evidence that the vaccines work well enough against all major variants. We will talk about that momentarily. But first of all, cases which peaked at more than 255,000 cases per day in mid-January, an outrageous number. Not illegal, but certainly an immoral number, as I like to say. Cases are now down under 50,000 cases per day for the first time since October of 2020. It's been 7 months since cases have been this low, down to about 47,000 per day as of yesterday. This is now down more than 80% from the peak in mid-January, and these numbers should continue down and look even better by Memorial Day, certainly by mid-June. As far as deaths go, deaths peaked in late January at nearly 3,500 deaths per day, more than a 9/11 every single day. And those are now also down more than 80% to about 675 a day. Still horrible, but dramatically lower. And understand that daily deaths in the U.S. have not been below 700 a day since July of last summer. So that is going very much in the right direction. Deaths as low as they've been in basically 10 months. Now, globally, cases were coming down and are coming down in the U.S. Globally, we did see a spike led by countries like India and Brazil, among others. That has also turned around, not by much, but globally cases are now down about 3 to 4% from the peak that happened about 10 days ago. We hope that the global numbers will also start coming down more significantly as vaccines get to more and more countries. And we will speak momentarily about Joe Biden coming out in support of lifting or not enforcing patents on vaccines. I actually don't think that's going to make a difference, but I'm going to tell you why in the next segment. Earlier this week, I did tell you that vaccination is a growing problem in the sense that supply is now exceeding demand in many places. And we've seen average daily doses decline from their high of about 3.4 million a day, now down to just 2.1 million doses per day over the last week. That's not good, but it will still get us where we need to go as long as it continues. But the decline in doses led Joe Biden to announce a new vaccination initiative earlier this week. We talked about it yesterday. CVS Pharmacy has already met the call. They are going to be offering walk-in vaccination, no appointment necessary, at thousands of pharmacies across the country. But the really good news about vaccines is they work on the variants of concern. Dr. Eric Topol, former guest on the show, published yesterday a great infographic showing us that of all of the relevant variants so far, there's the British, South African, and Brazilian. Then there's the New York, California, and India variants. We have at least some evidence that the vaccines work. For example, with the UK, South Africa, and Brazil variants, we now have lab studies, randomized clinical trials, and real-world evidence that the vaccines work well enough on those variants that if we keep vaccinating, we can get out of this. For the New York, California, and India variants, we don't yet have the randomized controlled trials, but we have lab studies and we have real-world evidence. So we have a path out of this. Moderna and Pfizer, at minimum, are working on boosters that will be tweaked for the variants for the fall or winter. So the path is clear. By Memorial Day, we will have a better situation than we have today. And a little deeper, early summer, it will be even better if people keep getting vaccinated. Let's talk next about the patents. Big news. Joe Biden yesterday came out in full support of lifting patent protections on coronavirus vaccines to help produce more vaccines globally. The Biden administration said that we need a breakthrough for international vaccination happening quite well in the United States and well in a few other countries, but there are lots of countries that don't even have vaccines on the immediate horizon right now. And Joe Biden has now said, let's do it. Let's suspend intellectual property protections to ramp up vaccine production. And this is something Joe Biden has been increasingly under pressure to say. It's not, doesn't appear to be something Joe Biden can actually do, but the reasoning is clear. We have a global health crisis. These are extraordinary circumstances. We need to produce as many doses as quickly as possible. And this would be a case where, while you can respect conceptually intellectual property protections and patents and copyright, you can make the case this particular situation warrants lifting those protections. Now, I have to tell you, for me, there are two stories here. First of all, is the story that Joe Biden is being pushed left. I mean, at this point, on paper, this may be the most progressive administration in history. We have to understand what we're comparing to, but this is something that Big Pharma was completely against. They got expensive lobbyists pushing for it not to be done, for there to be no lifting of patents. And while Joe Biden can't actually do it, Biden standing up to them and saying this should be done is a really big deal. If you look at Joe Biden's position on healthcare, it's to the left of Obama. If you look at Joe Biden's position on taxation, it's to the left of Obama. On paper, this may be the most progressive administration in history. Now, we've never had, Bernie has never been president. So we have to understand what that means. For those who said Joe Biden could not be pushed left, he clearly has been, at least to some degree. Now, here's my concern about this entire vaccine patent thing. I agree that the patents should be lifted. I agree that as many places as possible should be given whatever they need to start manufacturing vaccines as quickly as possible. There's no question whatsoever. That being said, I don't think the lifting of patents is actually going to get us out of this mess. Why? In researching what it would take for places that are not yet producing vaccines to start producing vaccines, you could be looking at 2 years of time to build the infrastructure to produce vaccines if you start today. So while I agree that the patents should be lifted and that there are reasons for the future that it would be great to set that precedent in a global pandemic and all, I'm with it. I'm with you. I think this is a great thing that Joe Biden has said. If it takes 2 years to build the infrastructure, if you don't have it to start producing vaccines, if you start today, and who could start today? You've got to find locations. You have to figure out where are these factories going to go. If it takes 4 months to start, and then it takes 2 years to do, and then the entire vaccine production and distribution would take several more months, we are looking at new vaccine production, if patents are lifted today, that wouldn't deliver vaccines until the end of 2023. It's just too late. I don't want to be a party pooper. I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. But it's not clear to me that this is anything more than, at least for the next 2 years, a theoretical or academic question. It should be done. And for the future pandemic, I'm with it. Again, I'm with it. Please don't write to me saying, David, how dare you be against it? No, I'm for it. But when I see all these people on Facebook saying we could just get out of this if the vaccine patents were lifted, Moderna did say it won't enforce its patent. There's other aspects of the production that Moderna doesn't control, which have intellectual property protections. I get that. I just don't see how this gets us out of the pandemic any sooner. If I'm missing something, let me know. The right decision, I don't actually think it will get vaccines into people's arms any sooner for this pandemic. Let me know your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @Pakman. Quick break. Great show today. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. If you just can't get enough show every day, if an hour isn't enough, there's an extra 15 to 20 minutes available every day. It's called The Bonus Show, and it's one of many great membership perks. Sign up at joinpakman.com and you'll get that bonus show delivered to you in audio or video, whichever you prefer, every single day. Joinpakman.com is the place to do it. I also want to invite you to subscribe free to the David Pakman Show subreddit, with now more than 30,000 of our viewers and listeners subscribed at davidpakman.com/Reddit. This morning, I saw some interesting posts, including one that asked, so do anti-vaxxers think that their friends will still hang out with them? One of the easiest steps you can take to reduce COVID risk is to not see anti-vax people that you might know. Even though I am now vaccinated and fairly comfortable returning to more normal activities, I will definitely avoid anyone that is anti-vax, says this viewer. Do anti-vaxxers think people won't avoid them? We have been avoiding risky activities for a year, so do they think people will just start hanging out with them again? Maybe friends deciding not to see anti-vaxxers will nudge them towards getting the vaccine. I think there will be that to a degree. I think it depends on what part of the country you're in. But I know that much to the chagrin of those who are now suddenly want medical privacy, I regularly am saying to people, are you vaccinated? I was invited to something a couple of weeks ago and I said, is everybody vaccinated? And I was told, yes, everybody is. And I said, great. Okay, I'll be there. And when I was invited to a different thing 3 weeks ago and I was told, well, you know, of the 4 couples, 2 are not vaccinated. I said, yeah, it's not for me. I'm not doing indoor stuff with unvaccinated people right now. It just doesn't really make sense, even though I am vaccinated. Outdoor I will do. I think that will be an issue, and I think that's a really good thing if it influences more people into getting vaccinated, for sure. Another user says the party of free speech looks to cancel Liz Cheney for speaking against Trump. Yeah, I'm glad that this is being exposed, the incredible double standard on cancellation and free speech. The side that has been claiming to be all about free speech and claiming to be all about not canceling people is now trying to cancel Liz Cheney. They're trying to get her removed from her leadership posts. They're trying to get her off of committees. They want her primaried and removed because she had the audacity to think for herself on impeachment. And she had the audacity to say what should be really uncontroversial, which is, hey, Joe Biden won and the election wasn't rigged. And of course, it's much of this free speech for us, but not for you, except it depends unless you disagree. But if we like it, then of course we'll defend it. It's always been a pathetic hypocrisy. It should be pointed out. And the Liz Cheney cancellation attempts are only the latest example. And then lastly, a user claiming that Tucker Carlson inspired assaults have started. So I want to be clear that there has been a horrible attack in New York City by an individual who came up to another and said, take off that mask and beat them. And we have no particular reason to think that the attacker was inspired by Tucker Carlson's recent rants saying, if you see people outside wearing a mask, tell them, take the mask off. We have no reason to think that. But the Tucker Carlson statements, the Tucker Carlson rants about being against masks are the type of thing that we often describe as stochastic terrorism. In this case, it's not terrorism, it's stochastic anti-maskerism or something like that, where if you have a large enough audience, some people will hear you say, demand the masks be taken off, and they will do it, and they will even take it to the next level. There's certainly not going to be any liability for Tucker Carlson. I'm not suggesting that, nor am I suggesting that there should be. It really raises some very dangerous questions if just saying that then would be linked back to Tucker and Tucker could get arrested because someone assaulted someone else over a mask. That's not what I'm suggesting. But there is no question that given the size of Tucker's audience, it will have an impact. And whether this has any connection to Tucker or not, we will never know. But there are, with great power comes great responsibility. I don't know who said that. That might have been, I don't know who said it. It might be from Spider-Man, actually. I don't know. But there is a responsibility to understand what would be the follow-on effects from the things that you say when you have a platform. I try to think about that every day. And it certainly will have an impact. Join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit, davidpakman.com/Reddit. You absolutely have to see this interview from last night with California, potential California gubernatorial candidate Caitlyn Jenner, of course, of the Kardashians fame, former Olympian as Bruce Jenner earlier in life. Now Caitlyn Jenner, worth $100 million personally by most reports. And that becomes very relevant during the interview. The current California governor is Democrat Gavin Newsom. There's an effort to recall Gavin Newsom. In order to do this, Californians need to collect just shy of 1.5 million signatures to have a recall. It appears they've done it. They've collected 1.6 million, but those signatures now have to be validated. Signers also have 30 days to say, actually, I signed it, but I don't want to be on the list anymore. So at some point relatively soon, we will see, will the recall be happening? Now, if indeed it happens, Caitlyn Jenner has announced that she is running. Caitlyn Jenner is notable because she is a trans woman and a Republican, although how much she knows about politics is in question. And you will notice that in this interview. Of course, the Republican Party hasn't been very good to the trans community. Many have been outright hostile to the trans community in many ways, including on the bathroom issue for years now. So Jenner was interviewed last night by Sean Hannity, and the combination of completely unrelatable comments about private jets with Sean Hannity and Hannity just looking so uncomfortable with the interview makes this one of the most compelling political interviews in a long time. I was watching these clips over and over again last night, like the Zapruder film, preparing for today. So let's jump right in. In this first clip, Caitlyn Jenner tells us, listen, we've got to solve these problems in California because you know what? My neighbor at my hangar where I keep my private plane, he's thinking of leaving. And I'm thinking of leaving if we don't improve things. Think of the private plane owners. This you have to see.
California. My friends are leaving California. Actually, we're at my hangar. The guy across right over from me, he was packing up his hangar. I said, where are you going? And he says, I'm moving to Sedona, Arizona. I can't take it here anymore. I can't walk down the streets and see the homeless. I don't want to leave. Okay, either I stay and fight or I get out of here.
Why is no one talking about the marginalized, oppressed, private plane owners thinking of leaving? This is how bad it is in California, guys. The private plane owners, they are having to see homeless people on the way to their hangar. And that is just terrible. The private plane owners are this close to packing up their private jets and flying somewhere else. And Caitlyn Jenner is going to keep them in California if elected governor. Okay, so off to a blazing fast start, as you can see. And this is nothing. It gets even worse. Now, of course, Caitlyn Jenner was asked by Hannity about transgender girls in sports. Republicans know almost nothing about the trans community, but the two things they know about and care about are trans bathroom laws and trans girls in sports. Those are the two trans issues for Republicans. Caitlyn Jenner's answer is a complete mystery to me. I've watched this 3 times. I'm going to watch it now a 4th time with you. I can't make heads or tails out of this answer. Take a look.
I stick with my statements that I made. I think we have to make sure that the integrity of girls' sports is there. I think that's extremely important. But there's more to it than just what I said, because I just said biological boys in sports. There's more to it than that. And I think in the future, I will explain more of that. But for me, as a trans woman, I think role models are extremely important for young people. trans issues people struggle with big time. Our suicide rate is 9 times higher than the general public. And for me to be a role model for them, to be out there, I am running for governor of the state of California. Who would have ever thunk that? We've never even had a woman governor.
But some are mad at you.
I don't, you know, I move on. I want to be a role model, and I think and to be a leader. And I think the most important thing as a leader that you can do is your compassion, your honesty. And I think that sometimes is very lacking in politics. So I want to be an example to all people, not just trans people, that this is what you can do.
Why on the sports side of it, though?
Why don't I what?
How you came down on the sports side of the issue?
I don't know why, to be honest with you, I don't know why they keep asking that. What do you think, Sean? I don't know. Why do they keep asking me that question?
Great question.
It is a good question.
So what on earth is her position on the issue of trans girls in sports? Imagine being a Republican and thinking, this is great. A trans candidate. Finally, we are going to get clarity. What is Caitlyn Jenner's position on trans girls in sports? What would Caitlyn Jenner do as governor about trans girls in sports? And then you hear that and you come out even more confused. And then this is just straight out of a comedy show. Sean Hannity asks Caitlyn Jenner's position on forest fires. And this is, I mean, you know, what on earth would Caitlyn Jenner know about that issue? But it's a big issue in California. If you're going to run for governor of California, you need an answer to this because forest fires really are an issue. And her answer is almost verbatim a Trump answer about, oh, you've got to do forest management.
Would you allow controlled burns? Isn't there a science behind forestry? Is that science being ignored in this state?
Yes.
Because when I watch it, it breaks my heart. I lived in Santa Barbara. I watched Hope Ranch burn down after I had just left the state.
Yes. Yes, forest management is extremely important. Yeah. Just like at my house, and it's not even forest management at my house. The reason my house made it, because they say you have to keep any brush 50 or 75 feet. I think I had 75 feet clearance. When the fires came, they just went around my house so fast, it was gone because it's moving very fast. So it's almost the same thing for forest management, just a little bit of preparation.
So there it is. I mean, guys, just do the forest management and everything will be fine. Why do we keep talking about this? Just manage the forest and that's it. And if you thought that was Trumpian, in this next clip, Caitlyn Jenner takes credit for Governor Gavin Newsom loosening COVID restrictions, which is completely out of the Trump playbook. Take credit for things that have nothing to do with you. And the really funny thing is Jenner says, you know, if I were governor, I'd open the state tomorrow. If the recall happens, it's months away. California's opening in 5 weeks. So the Caitlyn Jenner would open the state tomorrow, except the recall is months away and California will be open by then. Take a look.
Would you open the state of California completely tomorrow?
Absolutely. Open it right up. Actually, you know what? It's
just don't close In-N-Out Burger
Sean,
before I leave.
It's even on a small scale kind of working already. About 3 weeks ago, it was rumored, and rightfully so, it was rumored that I was looking in to run for governor. The next day, Gavin Newsom has a press conference that says the state is opening up July 15th. I'm laying there in bed and watching this, and I'm saying, yes, it's already working.
So there it is. Caitlyn Jenner may be responsible for COVID restrictions loosening in July. All bizarre. And then Hannity asks Jenner for an assessment of Trump, Biden, and Harris. When this happened, I got the popcorn and got ready. And her explanation about why Trump good, Biden bad, it's the exact meaningless, vapid drivel we hear from Trumpists. Take a look at this.
We've had 4 years of Donald Trump. We have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Give me your assessment of those three people.
What I liked about Donald Trump is he was a disruptor. You know, he came in and shook the system up, okay? A lot of people didn't like that in Washington, D.C. but he came in and shook the system up. I think he did some things that I agreed with, some things I didn't agree with.
You were critical on transgender issues.
On trans issues, LGBT issues, I was more hopeful at the beginning. But there were some good things he did. On the other hand, Biden, I don't think I've agreed with anything. I don't think since he's been in there, he has done anything for the American worker, maybe other ones. So it is a 180-degree turn in our country, going the other direction, and it scares me.
It's almost verbatim what we've heard for a long time. Trump was different. He shook things up. He wasn't a politician. It was a new direction. It's just meaningless, vapid dribble once again. And then maybe my favorite clip of the entire interview. This is the wrap up. Hannity thanks Caitlyn Jenner for doing the interview. And Jenner brings up the private plane again and says, let's go for a flight. And Hannity just looks visibly uncomfortable.
Caitlyn Jenner, thank you for being with us.
It was my pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Sean.
Good to talk to you. Good to see you again.
Now, we're going to go find my plane around the corner. I'm going to take you for a flight.
I'm going right, wheels up any minute. All right. All right. Thank you for your time. We do wish you nothing but the best. We're going to follow this race closely.
So there it is. Just a strange interview, Trumpian in many ways, completely lacking in substance, completely absent was any serious policy discussion. And I watched this entire thing. I don't know why Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor. It's not clear to me what Caitlyn Jenner brings to the table as a gubernatorial candidate. But seeing Republicans, on the one hand, they want to remove Gavin Newsom, but at the same time, many of them dislike trans people as much as they dislike Gavin Newsom. And now they've got a transgender Republican candidate, I guess, running if the recall ends up happening. They're in a tizzy. They don't know. Up is down, down is up. It's bizarro world for them. So we're going to follow the California situation. Very interesting to see. And one of the most unusual interviews I've ever seen. We'll have clips of it on our Instagram page as well. Follow us there at David Pakman Show. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. It's great to welcome back to the show today Cal Newport, who's a computer science professor at Georgetown University, author of several books, and most recently, which I just finished, A World Without Email, Reimagining Work in an Age of Communication Overload. Cal, it's always great to have you on.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back.
So in the book, A World Without Email, one of the things you explain is that many jobs, even jobs that don't really have to do with email in terms of what the main impetus of the job is, have become 20, 30, 40, sometimes even more than half managing an inbox, responding to emails in a way that is anywhere from relatively to completely unproductive. You talk about the history of this, and it's really interesting because when email was introduced to office culture, you didn't just have office culture and work culture as it existed with the addition of email. It completely changed the way that work worked, so to speak. Can you talk a little bit about that first?
This is what caught us off guard in the world of work, that when we brought email into our offices, which we did predominantly in the first half of the 1990s, that's when it really spread aggressively through offices. We did so for very narrow pragmatic reasons. We were replacing fax machines, we were replacing voicemail, we were replacing memos. It was like, great, this tool is better at those purposes than the existing technology we were using. Once email actually got into offices, though, it had an unexpected side effect, which is people began using it as the primary means by which they coordinated or collaborated. We introduced a workflow in which everything began to be worked out with back and forth, informal, ad hoc messaging. That didn't scale. And soon we found ourselves overwhelmed with all of the back and forth messages required to support this workflow where everything happens through back and forth messaging. And it's really that workflow, not the tool itself, not the way that it replaced fax machines, not the way it replaced voicemail, but this workflow where we began to work everything out with back and forth messages. That's what created the overload problem that we're all suffering from today.
To some degree, it seems almost like it's become background in this particular sense. My mom also is a college professor, and she's been teaching for decades at this point. And I asked her in preparation for this interview, you know, back like in the 90s, before you were so dependent on email for communication with your department and communication with students and so on, what consumed your day? Because roughly you're working the same amount of time, but now a ton of the time is email. Clearly the email time now was for something else before. She had no idea. Like, in other words, it's sort of crept in such a way where she agrees, I work roughly the same amount. I didn't used to do the email thing. Now I do. I don't remember what I did before. Is that surprising to you, or does that make sense?
Well, I think we should not underestimate the degree to which this workflow, in which now we have to attend these inboxes all day, is really actually putting its hand down firmly on economic growth. And looking at a college professor is it's a good bottle case study, because it's a job that has been basically the same for 200 years. And in my book, I talked about my grandfather was the great example, a very successful professor, endowed chair at Rice University that went on to be the provost of a theological seminary, incredibly productive, such an effective teacher that even to this day, I still hear from his former students, he had such a big impact on his life. He never owned a computer until after he retired. And I'm thinking his objectives were no different than my objectives as a professor today, to do research and to teach well. And he had no email. And yet today we'll spend, like your mom was talking about, 50 to 60% of our time on email. It's a real issue. So what is getting squeezed out here? I think productive output. I think the reason why non-industrial productivity metrics have been stagnant for decades, even as we put all this innovation into very rapid, low friction communication and computation technology, is because we are moving more and more of our time into just tending this communication. And I think what we have to do to compensate for that is we're adding extra work off the books. We're working early in the morning. We're working in the evening. Like we're basically trying to just keep productivity stable by adding a lot more hours into the mix. It's a huge issue, and it's one I think we're ignoring.
One approach to the issue, and some of your past writing has sort of dealt with this, and there's many other people who write about this, is about techniques and strategies. Train others to expect that you check email once a day, or at the beginning, at the end, or 3 times a week, or whatever. And over time, that's going to help everybody. Or write your emails in a way where you are providing the other person everything they need to complete the task, rather than communicating the minimum, which then creates a back and forth over a week for something that a 5-minute phone call might be able to fix. That's one approach, like the very nitty-gritty logistical approach. That doesn't seem to me like it really gets at the bigger picture issue. What do you think, that we need to be tackling both the big picture and the nitty gritty, or could the nitty gritty really solve a lot of the problem?
The nitty gritty alone is not going to solve the problem. And this is why I think we're stuck, is we've been trying to solve the issue of email overload in the inbox itself. Oh, spend less time checking emails, batch your emails, have better subject lines, have better norms, have better expectations. But we can't solve this problem. This is one of the big idea of the new book, is we can't solve this problem just in the inbox. The issue is the underlying workflows. So long as implicitly the way that your organization collaborates is through ad hoc back and forth unscheduled messages, the demand to keep up with all of these back and forth threads demands that you check your inbox all the time, because that is how your work is actually happening. This is why when we don't change that underlying workflow, but just say have better habits when you personally interact with your inbox, that fails. So my big push now is to get past this moment we're in which we're extremely subduing our productivity because of all the constant context shifting and communication. We have to fix the underlying workflows. That is the rules and the guidelines and the agreements we have about how collaboration happens. It can't just be rock and roll in email, rock and roll in Slack, rock and roll in Teams. We'll just figure it out. That does not work. It is a bad way to build the metaphorical cars, if you know what I mean. And so we have to fix this at that level before the messages get into the inbox in the first place.
In the book, you talk about fixing it within an organization in terms of the communication with coworkers. And it's sort of different, at least, than fixing it when it comes to people you interface outside of your organization. Like, for example, consultants working with clients, which you include examples of in the book. Does it make sense to first fix it internally before doing it externally?
Both of these can happen in parallel. It doesn't quite matter. What really matters is having that mindset shift, which is saying, okay, our work is made up of processes. We might not call it that, but that's what they are. They're things we do on a regular basis that produce the value for our team, our organization, our company. Okay, how are we implementing these processes? How do we get the information? Where do we store the information? How do we communicate with each other to actually accomplish these processes? What are our rules for that? And if you don't have rules written down, the default answer is probably this hyperactive hive mind approach of we'll just work it out on the fly. Once you have that mindset, yeah, you're going to see those client communication processes. Let's make those better. They're internal processes. How do we schedule meetings? How do we agree on new copy for ads? You fix those processes. But the big step here is that mindset shift that even in knowledge work, there's things you do again and again. And either you have rules about how you want to collaborate to accomplish those things or you don't. And if you don't, you're probably leaving a huge amount of productivity on the table.
One of the things you talk about in the book is that when people in the knowledge work space are presented with this idea, almost invariably, they react by saying, okay, yeah, that might work in industries A, B, C, and D, but I'm in a more unique position in my particular job, in my particular field with my particular company. This really wouldn't work. And that belief seems to be very prevalent. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about the types of changes that probably would work in just about any knowledge work field?
Well, I think one of the problems here is that when people think about reforming email, they think about, okay, what if nothing changed about the underlying workflow? When they're imagining it, they're imagining their work as it happens right now in their organization, where most things are figured out with back and forth messaging.
Right.
And then they say, in that context, if I stopped using email as much, bad things would happen. And they're right. If your organization or team uses this hyperactive hive mind workflow, it would be a problem if you stopped using it. So getting people to look below the inbox and say, no, we want to fix how you collaborate in the first place so that those messages don't show up in your inbox, that you're not figuring things out with unscheduled messages, and we get down to the roots of it. So what do those changes look like? It depends on the process, right? So this is why this is it's not a tool discussion. It's a non sequitorious question to say, well, if not email, then what tool? Completely, it's not the question. The question is, okay, if not this hyperactive hive mind workflow, how else should we collaborate or communicate? It depends on what you're doing. So sometimes these solutions are simple plug-in technology fixes. If you have to schedule a bunch of meetings, you should absolutely be using a meeting scheduling tool. Having to go back and forth emails to find a time to meet is surprisingly cognitively taxing. Fine. Sometimes what you're talking about is a process that's very rigorously defined. It's the same steps, one after another. This is what we do to produce our podcast episode every week. It's 7 steps, one follows the others. Those can often be automated in such a way that no one has to send unscheduled messages back and forth. The stuff moves from place to place. People see it without having to do unscheduled messaging. And sometimes these fixes are about making information and collaboration more structured. So all of the information for this project is on a shared task board that we can all look at. We have highly structured status meetings that are 15 minutes long, where it's what were you working on last time? How did it go? What are you working on today? What do you need to get that done? Great. We'll talk again tomorrow. So very structured check-ins, very structured ways of storing the information. That's sort of the third category of what these process overhauls look like. So the particular tools or rules or guides depends on what's the specific process that you're overhauling. But the thing that unifies this all is looking at all the processes in your work life and saying, how do we reduce all of this back and forth unscheduling messaging for each of them?
You know, one of the things I was thinking of as I read the book was that there's a sort of maybe parallel issue or question here, which is one that's been written about a lot in the last 5 to 7 years, of attention span. And there are very differing views on this issue. I think I've read a lot of Nir Eyal's work where he says he doesn't think that fundamentally there is an attention span issue, but that the issues are something different. And there's others who say, no, you know, the mobile phones and the email and all of these things have conditioned people in some way to for it to be more and more difficult to spend longer periods of time focused on one thing. Is there some way in which this entire email thing of 30, 40, 50% of your day is dipping in and out of answering emails quickly to get breaks from the more serious work, maybe connected less to systems, but to this attention span issue?
Yeah, it's an important question because I see a clear separation between what's happening, let's say, with our phones, the attention span issue with social media, online news, wanting to continually go back to my phone and be distracted,
Yeah.
where you have tools that are engineered that try to distract you. I see that as very separate from what's happening with us having to check email all the time.
Okay.
Now, it has been common to look at email through the lens of a sort of personal addiction. For example, when the hyperactive hive mind workflow first took off in the 2000s, we introduced terminology like crackberries to refer to people checking their BlackBerries all the time. But I'm convinced, based on my research, that the reason we're checking email all the time, it's not a failure of personal will. It is not an escape from work that is difficult. It is because the underlying workflow, what I call the hyperactive hive mind, demands it. If most of the way that things get worked out or collaboration occurs in your organization is with unscheduled back and forth messages, there is no other way to successfully interface with your organization than to constantly be checking those inboxes, because that's what you need to do to keep knocking these metaphorical tennis balls back across the net, to keep these ongoing asynchronous ad hoc conversations going. So when it comes to email, I don't think the issue is that people have bad habits. I think the issue is that organizations are running in nonsensical ways.
Last thing I want to touch on, you talk in the book about how many of the tasks that are now distributed throughout the day for a knowledge worker or professional of different kinds, at some previous point might have been handled by either an assistant secretary or a position that now is essentially no longer needed. To me, that seems like a huge cost reduction for many companies. Is that an economic reality that will resist the types of changes you're talking about because it is so much less expensive? Or is the counter that the lost productivity, because a lot of these professionals are doing these things throughout the day, essentially outweighs the cost savings of not having the assistant or the secretary?
I think the latter is true. I mean, there are some studies that actually quantify this. One of the studies I talk about in the book was watching the arrival of personal computers in a collection of Fortune 500 companies. And what they saw and what they observed in this research is that, yes, they fired a lot of the support staff because technically the computer made it easy enough to do a lot of the things that the support staff was doing that the frontline executives could do it themselves. But this researcher, he actually tracked the numbers and found out that they ended up having to hire more of the much higher paid executives to get the same amount of work done, because so much of their day now was spent doing things like word processors and communication, et cetera, that the salary cost went up. So they saved salary costs by firing support staff, but then increased salary costs by having to hire more people to get the same amount of work done. And they ended up worse off because these salaries were higher. I think we missed the mark on the digital productivity revolution. As technology made certain administrative tasks easier, the right move was not to move all of that work onto the plate of the executives or frontline value producers. It should have been to make it cheaper to have support staff. I think the right application of that technology would be, fewer support staff can now support more of the frontline workers. That was probably the right way to approach the productivity revolution in terms of maximizing return. Instead, we said, let's fire the support workers and make everyone a part-time administrative assistant and a part-time whatever their main job is. We know the way the brain works, that was a bad mix. So I think we really missed the mark on this digital productivity revolution. It does make us much more productive if we use that to actually empower support staff to be even more effective, not to put more things on the plate of the people that you wanted thinking about the ad copy or making the executive decisions or writing the academic papers or whatever it is you had hired them to do.
Right. It's a fascinating book. The book is A World Without Email, Reimagining Work in an Age of Communication Overload. You know, I find that so often when I talk to people about this book, other books you've written, and there's this visceral reaction like, that would never work. We shouldn't even be thinking about that. Do you see, is that a common reaction from a lot of people?
Well, I think the key thing with this book is understanding that you're changing the workflow, because as soon as you say just you need to spend less time on email, they're so overwhelmed by this hyperactive hive mind workflow. They're like, are you kidding me? I would be dead, because everything is happening in the inbox. But the real aha moment for most people is when you say, yeah, the reason why that's happening is because the underlying agreements by how work happens is generating all these messages, and it doesn't have to be that way. And you tell them about companies where they don't use email and they don't use Slack and they don't have an inbox to check and they do one thing at a time and maybe they work on 3 things each day. And when you show them those stories, you can just see the light turn on behind their eyes. So I think that's key. The way we work today makes it impossible not to check email. I agree. We can fix the underlying way we work, though.
We've been speaking with Cal Newport, computer science professor at Georgetown University. We'll link to the latest book, A World Without Email. Cal, always great having you on.
Thanks, David.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. Okay, this you really have to see. On Fox and Friends yesterday morning, one of their three hosts, Brian Kilmeade, was reduced to arguing with children about Trump versus Biden in a segment that, if he was able to feel shame, he should be completely humiliated by his participation in this segment. An 11-year-old kid pretty accurately makes the case that he's feeling better about getting back to school and about handling the pandemic now that Joe Biden is president and is dealing with the coronavirus in a serious way. Completely reasonable position. It's an 11-year-old kid. Kilmeade sort of seems to crack. He didn't like the kid's comment, I guess, and he sort of like responds rudely to the kid. It's very weird. Take a look at this.
How close are you to getting back in the room? What do you miss most about not being in school?
I miss most, obviously, seeing my friends and all the after-school activities that I've done, and I think that we're very, very close getting back to school, and I think that the way that our new president is handling things is a very good way, and we would not have gone to this if it were still the last president.
Really? That's hard to believe, because the last president was saying, I want every kid back in school. Lily, for you, what is your hope, knowing the numbers are going down and the governor might be opening up?
Did you notice that Kilmeade even moved on to the next kid right away before the 11-year-old could refute Kilmeade's completely flaccid counterpoint? He doesn't want the kid to say another word. Now, a source at Fox News told me after the interview, Kilmeade referred to the kid as a poopy head. And that seems on brand with the way this entire segment went. Who thought this was a good idea? Who conceives of this segment and thinks it's a good idea? And if it wasn't Kilmeade and the segment was put in front of him, why not react by saying, interesting, it's so great that you're involved in following what's going on or whatever. Can Brian Kilmeade feel anything but complete and total shame over this segment, or at least should he? Who wants to bet that this kid's parents end up getting threats as a result of this segment? That's the serious thing. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be even remotely surprising to me. And again, why even try to counter what an 11-year-old is saying? If you strongly refute a kid, you're beating an 11-year-old in a debate. And of course, if the kid makes more sense than you, which was actually the case here, you really look like a moron. And it's almost like that game show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader or a Sixth Grader, whatever? It's the Fox News edition of that game show, and the hosts are losing badly. Like, imagine feeling the urge to debate and disprove rather than encourage a kid for their involvement in what's going on in the world around them. And this is how propaganda motivates people to behave. Every differing opinion, it doesn't matter how minor, it doesn't matter how non-threatening the purveyor of the opinion is, it is perceived as a threat that must be dealt with immediately. You know, interesting. Thanks for sharing your opinion. It's great to see kids involved in their country taking an interest. Great. No. Instead, Kilmeade argues with and then cuts off an 11-year-old kid. Now, I'm being totally serious here. I'm not joking about this. If you replaced Kilmeade with this 11-year-old on Fox and Friends, it would be a way better and more interesting show. I might become a regular viewer of Fox and Friends if this kid was mixing it up with Steve Doocy and Ainsley Earhart instead of Brian Kilmeade. That would make it a better show. And I'm not kidding when I say the kid seems better informed than most of the Fox News audience. I have no doubt whatsoever about that. Now, for a moment, let's deal with the substance of Brian Kilmeade's rebuttal. Kilmeade is right. Trump said, open every school and put every kid back in school. It was the middle of a pandemic. We had not nearly enough testing, no guidelines about how to safely open schools absent vaccination, and we had no vaccines. We had no precautions. We had no preventive measures. Trump just said, open it all up. It's true Trump said it, but it would have been insanely dangerous to open schools when and how Donald Trump said he wanted to do it. And fortunately, it didn't happen. Now Joe Biden is doing it, and it's being done safely. And it's abundantly clear who got the right side of that argument. It wasn't Kilmeade. It was the 11-year-old kid. As we reported to you yesterday, Donald Trump's Facebook ban has been reduced from indefinite to we will review it in 6 months, but it was not ended yesterday. For anybody thinking Trump might be back on Facebook yesterday, from that perspective, the ban was extended. As expected, Republicans, Fox News, right-wing media, Don Jr., even Donald Trump himself, from his new blog, have been melting down over this decision. We're going to go through it and we're going to point out what are some really, truly terrible arguments so that you will be prepared when you hear these or see these on Facebook or at the water cooler. Are water coolers even COVID safe now? I don't know. First, Donald Trump himself, who published to his new communications social media platform, which I know as a blog, he published the following message. This is Trump. What Facebook, Twitter, and Google have done is a total disgrace and an embarrassment to our country. Now, he's wrong about that. The embarrassment are the actions of Trump that led to his being banned, including inciting a riot on January 6th. Trump goes on to say, free speech has been taken away from the president of the United States because the radical left lunatics are afraid of the truth. But the truth will come out anyway, bigger and stronger than ever before. This is not really a free speech issue, and we've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it in a minute, so I won't spend too much time on that. Trump then going on to say, the people of our country will not stand for it. These corrupt social media companies must pay a political price and must never again be allowed to destroy and decimate our electoral process. I don't know what kind of a price Trump is talking about. A political price, like maybe regulation, which Trump is against. Next example, here is Donald Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, on Fox News, saying that it is a sad day for America, and this might actually make Republicans in Congress enforce the antitrust laws already on the books that they never cared about until now. This is just the best. Take a look.
The Oversight Board will uphold the ban on Donald Trump. Your reaction?
Yeah, it's a sad day for America. It's a sad day for Facebook, because I can tell you a number of members of Congress are now looking at, do they break up Facebook? Do they make sure that they don't have a monopoly? And I can tell you that it is two different standards, one for Donald Trump and one for a number of other people that are on their sites and suggesting that more nefarious things than what the president has been accused of actually go unnoticed often. And so this is a sad day for America, but a sadder day for the Facebooks of the world who have actually enjoyed a very wild, wild west kind of regulatory environment. I can tell you that's going to change. The discussion will happen within hours of this decision on Capitol Hill, just a few blocks from where I am.
Now, there is a real conversation here about the reality that the United States has had antitrust laws on the books for a long time. There has been no interest in the U.S. politically in enforcing them. I've been talking about this issue for years. We've done interviews about it. The Republicans never cared before about enforcing antitrust. Antitrust enforcement is regulation, which they are against. Suddenly now, these hypocrites care about antitrust. They are transparently pathetic. The next clip I would play would be of Donald Trump Jr. on Steven Crowder's program. From what I understand, Crowder is really aggressive with copyright strikes on YouTube, so I'm not going to play the clip. But as Crowder tweeted, Don Jr. told him that, quote, the Facebook Oversight Board holding up the Trump suspension says a lot about the powers of companies like Facebook. I imagine the board doesn't have a lot of people who share our views. It's an echo chamber of Silicon Valley. Now, same thing again. They suddenly care about antitrust now that they think it would help them to enforce it. But they never cared for decades about all of the monopolistic behavior that could have been stopped by enforcing the laws already on the books. Next clip is from Newsmax. Here is Susan Wright. Susan is a Trump-endorsed Republican candidate for Congress. Listen to what she says.
This obviously making waves with so many conservative voices here as they felt silenced along the way, and this ban speaks volumes. Your thoughts on it when you saw that breaking news?
Well, I haven't read nearly as much about it as I will, of course, throughout the day. But I will tell you that this censorship that the tech giants are engaging in is outrageous. It is absolutely outrageous. I don't support it. I think that you have to really wonder who is making these decisions. It's very subjective. There's some things they censor and some things they don't. There's a lot of radical groups on Facebook and other social media platforms who don't seem to be censored at all. But conservative groups and conservative voices are continually censored, continually pushed back, and continually vilified. In Congress, I'll do everything I can to shut that effort down and push back on them as well.
She hasn't read about it, but it's definitely censorship. Who is making these decisions? For-profit companies that Republicans like you, Susan Wright, have said for the last 100 years should never be regulated and should be allowed to make whatever decisions they want. That's who's making the decisions. Just another painfully hypocritical troll. And by the way, censorship of conservative voices on Facebook, the top clips on Facebook almost every day are Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino, Sean Hannity, other Fox News clips, other Fox News hosts. It's almost all right-wingers that dominate the top clips on Facebook. Last one. Republican Congressman Peter King says this violates free speech. Take a listen.
Congressman King, we'll start with you. Your reaction to this ruling by Facebook to uphold the ban for President Trump, at least temporarily.
I think it's unfortunate we even have to discuss this. I think it's outrageous what Facebook has done. And I would say the same if it was Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. To me, whether or not there's a constitutional right, and there could be a legal right here because of all the legal benefits and coverages and exemptions from liability that Congress has given to these platforms and to Facebook and to Twitter. But first of all, I think Facebook is wrong. The president's going to get his own platform that's going to work. But I just think Congress has to look at this. I think this is analogous to what we had in the beginning of the last century with antitrust. Sure, consumers can make a choice, but it's not a real choice because you have a few.
And there it is. Consumers can make a choice, but it's not a real choice. And it's a free speech issue. And it's time to enforce antitrust. What a principled statement from Peter King, right? Do not fall for it. It's only about how does it affect them right now. That's all that this is about. Every single one of these arguments, hypocritically and obviously not an argument they made until they thought we got to get Trump back on Twitter and Facebook. And all of a sudden, these are the arguments they're now making. Don't fall for it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is the Eggman weighing in on the plan for some sports stadiums to have vaccinated and unvaccinated sections. Take a listen.
Hey, Dave. I hear that in the opening of large sporting arenas and stuff, they're going to try to be inclusive to people that are unvaccinated, and they're going to make vaccinated people sit in one area and unvaccinated people sit in another area. I feel that is a complete recipe for disaster. And it reminds me of when I was in Italy and I was seeing a soccer game. It was Verona versus Chievo Verona.
Right.
Two super enemy opposing teams. And they seat you by which team that you root for. So they seat each side and separate sides of the arena separated by a big fence. People were throwing cups of urine, weapons, anything you could think that were on fire. There was anything you could name was landing over and on my head from the opposing team. And I'm just imagining the unvaccinated and vaccinated people just fighting with each other inside a sporting arena when one of their teams lost. Am I imagining things, or could this really happen? Shalom, brother.
Yes, of course. Shalom to the Eggman. Yeah, I've experienced similar things, soccer games in Argentina. It's sort of a similar situation. Yeah, I don't love it. I would rather see the stadiums take a more definitive approach and say, we want to get back to full capacity. And the way to do it is we're only going to allow vaccinated people in, because what some stadiums are doing is if you're vaccinated, there will be one section with full capacity. Every seat can be full. In another section, the unvaccinated section, they will only have every third seat occupied. one person for every 3 seats. And there's a bunch of different reasons I don't like it. What the Eggman is talking about is certainly a factor. But just take a stand. If you clearly you believe vaccination is safer because you allow people to sit together, you don't on the unvaccinated side. Just say, for not only for safety, but also as a business decision, we want to fill every seat. And the way to do it safely is with everybody being vaccinated. Let's see if every teams make that decision, if any teams make that decision. We have a great bonus show for you today. The alleged Capitol rioters are still being arrested to this day. They're still finding more and more of them. A California bar owner has been busted for making phony vaccination cards, and a federal judge has overturned the national eviction ban. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Don't miss it. Get instant access, and I really do mean instant, the speed of light, by signing up at joinpakman.com. I'll see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.